If God were good, he'd wish to make his creatures perfectly happy. And if God were almighty, he'd be able to do that. But his creatures aren't happy. In fact, a lot of them go through great suffering that causes them tremendous amounts of pain. So either God lacks power, or he lacks goodness, or he lacks both of those things. This is one of the greatest arguments against the existence of God, and is often referred to as the problem of pain or evil. But I'm going to show you today that this emotionally charged accusation against the existence of God has no legs to stand on. Okay, the first thing that we need to take a look at is human free will. We have free will as individual human beings to act in the way that we wish, and this is defined as the power of acting without the constraint of necessity or fate, the ability to act at one's own discretion. So again, we have the ability to choose to do this action or to do that action. Because of that innate free will, some of us are going to choose to do evil to other people, whether that be for money, for pride, for power. There's a whole host of reasons why somebody might do evil things to another human being. Not the least of these could include slavery or human trafficking or, a plethora of other things, child labor. There's a lot of things that, we do to one another that are evil, and we do those out of our own selfish desires. Now, you have to understand that God gave us free will, and the reason that we were given free will is so that we can choose to love. If you remember back to the last video, we said love is a choice. And so in this way, if you're forced to love, if you're forced to will the good of other people, then you can't actually love them, right? Imagine just for a moment that you create a, tiny little race of sentient robots, okay? But you force the robots to love you, okay? You force them to lay down their lives for your sake. Now, this is not going to feel or be true love, right? The robots don't actually love you because you force them to lay down their lives for you. So let's imagine that there is a God who created the human race. If he created us, he doesn't want to force us to love him. If he wants to be in a relationship with us, if he wants us to choose to love him, then we have to have the freedom to say, no, we don't love you. No, we reject you. So human free will is a big starting point for this idea of suffering and pain, because we need to be able to choose to love God, and as a result, we can choose to do evil and cause others pain. Okay, you might say in response to this free will argument, well, I thought God was supposed to be omnipotent. I thought God was supposed to be all-powerful. I thought you Christians would say, all things are possible with God. So why can't your omnipotent, all-powerful being just create a universe in which everybody is free, but no evil things happen? Nobody chooses to do evil things to one another, but we're still all free. And to me, this kind of just sounds like you're saying, God can create a creature that has free will, but also withhold that free will from the creature. And if this is the case, then I'd like to refer you to a quote by C.S. Lewis, who said, "Meaningless combinations of words do not suddenly acquire meaning simply because we prefix to them the two other words God can. It remains true that all things are possible with God. But what you're suggesting isn't a thing. It's a non-entity. Okay? God cannot contradict himself." Look, we can all imagine a world in which somebody about to commit a mass shooting takes their automatic rifle or weapon and begins to fire, and as they pull the trigger, all the bullets turn into marshmallows, and so they can't actually hurt anybody. Or somebody who's inciting hateful, violent speech Their sound waves that come out of their mouths aren't able to penetrate the ears of nearby listeners, therefore they can't get their message across to anybody nearby. Okay? But the problem is, if we're prevented from doing those things, then we're not actually free to do the things themselves. If we cannot cause evil and violence and suffering and pain to other people, then we're not free to act. Okay? And that's just the harsh reality of the situation, unfortunately. In a game of chess, there are rules by which the game is played. Within those rules, players have the freedom to move the pieces around. But if your opponent allowed each and every one of your moves to be revoked or undone, or their pieces disappeared off the board whenever it was convenient for you, or your pieces could move in any way you desired, well, then you wouldn't have a game, right? In the same way, God created the universe, and the universe has laws, right? Take, for example, the law of gravity, right? No matter how badly I want to escape gravity and fly without the aid of technology, I can't do it. But the fact that there is gravity allows me to live life. If there was no gravity and I'm just floating around as an entity in space, well, then I can't get the necessary nutrients to be able to feed my body. Not to mention I wouldn't be able to breathe because there'd be no atmosphere, which the atmosphere requires gravity to stay on the earth, right? So the laws, they limit the life, but they also allow us to play the game. Just like the rules of chess limit the possibilities of moves you can execute, but they allow you to play the game, okay? I want you to imagine, right, or try to exclude suffering, which, the existence of free will demands. Well, you're going to exclude life altogether. You can't take suffering out of the equation without withholding free will from the creatures themselves. Okay, great. Now, at this point, you say, fine, I get it. People need to be able to cause suffering and pain to other individuals in order to maintain free will. I concede. I get it. It makes sense. But that doesn't really account for natural disasters, natural suffering that exists as a byproduct of creation, right? Is God really okay with hurricanes and typhoons and earthquakes and all the other natural disasters that cause people pain and suffering each and every year? Is he really okay with cancer and viruses that kill millions of people each and every year and cause tremendous amounts of suffering? The world which we exist in, it doesn't seem like a good, safe world created by a good God who loves us. You hear stories during the COVID-19 pandemic about young people, perfectly healthy people, who contracted the virus and they died. Or, they contracted the virus and they were perfectly healthy before and now they have permanent disabilities. Is God really okay with that? And I think a lot of Christians say, well, it's all part of God's plan when somebody is suffering. And I'm going to quote from Father Mike Schmitz here, who says, as Catholic Christians, that's not true. That's just not true. That is not part of God's plan, and we have to stop saying that. I think we need to come to this understanding that God is intimately involved in everything, but he's not in control of everything, right? He's not a tyrant. When God created the physical constants, let's just say, the speed of light, for example. When he created the speed of light, he, by nature, nothing can travel faster than that. He limited his power that in the natural universe, by creating the physical constant, that is the speed of light, He limits his ability to create something that travels faster than the speed of light. Okay? So in the same way, God creates the natural order, and he creates the natural laws of the universe, which, by the way, are so fine-tuned that if, any one of them was off by a small margin, life wouldn't exist to begin with. But he creates those things and therefore can't control them. He's not in control of them. He's intimately involved. But he doesn't, as a tyrant, control everything and every little detail of the universe which his free creatures inhabit. Now, at this point, a lot of you are probably saying, okay, I can see it, I get it on both ends, but you know what? I'd rather just not have free will. I would rather just not suffer at the hands of other people. I would rather, God just come into my life and protect me from any instance of natural suffering and, take those things away from me because I don't want to suffer. You know what? Fine, God, I just don't want to be free. Just, constantly protect me. And I'm right there with you. I don't want to suffer. I don't want to experience pain. And I don't even know what it's like to be in, extreme pain. But I don't want it. I would do anything that I could to avoid that pain. And, here I just want to bring in the idea of God's perfect will versus his permissible will. God's perfect will for us, those are the things which he directly wills that we experience in our lives, are life and truth and wisdom and beauty and joy. Those things are things which God wants for us to experience in our lives. So whenever we have those things, they're a direct byproduct of God's goodness. But there are things which God allows to happen, and that's his permissible will. Okay? He does not want them to happen. Okay? That is not plan A. He does not want somebody who's young and healthy to contract COVID-19 and die because of it. That is not plan A. That is not what he wants for that person's life. But he allows it to happen because he's not in control of everything. He's not a tyrant. God deemed our lives so important to live that he created this extremely fine-tuned universe in which there are consequences for the natural laws that cause suffering for us. Okay? He created it and he said your lives are worth living even if you have to suffer in them. It's better that you live than don't live. Okay? And secondly, he said, your free will is so important to me that I won't even temporarily suspend it so that you can avoid suffering. Both of those things, I don't fully understand, but I do accept. Additionally, I think that God can bring a greater good out of suffering. I want you to think back on a time where you suffered a tremendous amount. Maybe it was physical pain or a mental suffering or any other kind of suffering that you might have experienced. And during that period, you probably thought to yourself, I don't want to be in pain. Please, God, just take this pain away from me. Or, why would a good God do this to me? Why would he cause me all this suffering? Or maybe it's the reason that you don't believe that there even is a God. And I want you to think back on that time and ask yourself, have I learned something from this? Am I going to be able to go through suffering more easily next time? Or am I going to be able to help somebody else in their suffering better the next time they experience suffering? And I think if you're honest with yourself, you're going to find that the answer is yes. And of course, this doesn't account for senseless suffering. But even in senseless suffering, I think God allows it to happen because he wants us to rely on him in all his entirety. He wants us to just offer ourselves up to say, God, you're in control. let your will be done. Let me do those things which you will me to do, even in the midst of suffering. And that is the greatest good, to rely on God in all its entirety. Which might not be the most pastoral answer, and I understand that, but this obviously isn't a pastoral answer. The Son of God suffered unto the death. Not that men might not suffer, but that their sufferings might be like his. If we imitate Christ, and we offer our sufferings up for the sake of other people, if we offer them to God, we'll find that the greater good was looming right there all along.